Hi there, this is Bo.
And this is Jerry.
And this is Don't Insult My Intelligence.
It's the podcast that questions, challenges, and exposes things that just insult our intelligence.
And those things can come from anywhere. Politics, society, music, movies, television, wherever.
Yep, and we're going to talk about it all. And in most cases, it's probably going to piss some people off. Parents, be warned that this podcast is not for kids. It's PG-13 at best and a hard R at most other times.
A little background. Jerry and I have been friends since high school, and we've always thought and lived a little outside of the norm, and we generally push the edge on most topics.
Mm-hmm. And when we were young, Bo's dad, when he would bust us doing stuff, as dads will do, when we tried to argue any kind of BS explanation to him, he would just stop and stare us straight in the face and just say, "Don't insult my intelligence."
Yeah, that was one of his most frequent sayings, so we heard that quite a bit growing up.
So we thought it'd make a great podcast concept, and here it is.
So here we go.
Don't insult my intelligence.
Let's see. So today we're going to talk about life on Mars.
Yep.
Not the band and not the David Bowie song, but actual life that exists on the planet.
That's right.
And so really, we'll get to this in a second, but the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is because one, there's a lot of interest about Mars in general. You know, like we were talking about before. You know, there's a lot of people that want to go to Mars. Like you were saying, Elon Musk is all into it. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be the obvious next technological advancement that we should probably do as humans. We should go establish a colony either on the moon or on Mars or both.
I would say both, but yes.
Yeah. But what's really kind of driven me on this is one night I got on this YouTube rabbit hole, and I came across, or one way or another, I came across this scientist named Gil Levin, and he worked on the original Viking missions. They were the first two spaceships. They both went up kind of simultaneously. They were the first two spaceships to land on Mars in 1976. Now, you know what? I say that maybe they weren't the first two to land on Mars, but they were the first two that landed that had a real scientific lab, like little mini laboratories on them, because they were sent there to look for life. That was like their main goal.
Right.
But there were lots of, in the early 70s, there were lots of space probes going out to lots of different planets. So, and we'll get into it, but according to this speech that I saw, and presentation I saw, and then a few other ones that Gil Levin has done, and Gil Levin was the scientist in charge of this life testing experiment in 1976. So he worked for NASA. Mm-hmm. According to him, his test for life came back positive, beyond the shadow of a doubt, for the specific test for life. So he was looking for microbacterial life.
Right.
So bacteria in the soil, metabolizing food and creating waste products like bacteria on Earth do. And according to him, his results were 100% positive, past the control, and yet have been disregarded by NASA since the 70s. And every argument they put up against why they were disregarding it has now been debunked or thoroughly, argued out. But yet still nobody talks about it, and they won't put another experiment on any other mission back to Mars since then. And it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
So it's really, and this guy is not a crackpot. All you have to do, and we'll put the things up in the show notes on this. All you have to do is listen to his speech, and it's like, gee whiz, this is crazy. Right. Why do we still say, oh, we're looking for life on Mars? Because he already found it.
Yeah.
So and it is not. This is not tinfoil hat stuff. This is not conspiracy. I mean, there's a conspiracy here to keep the information suppressed, I guess, or I don't know, but this is not crazy, Martians, whatever,
Well,
that kind of thing.
And that's what I don't understand about it, because I know we had talked about before, and I know, going back into our past within like the 20th century, yeah, absolutely. If it were like Edgar Rice Burroughs, Martians, people would freak out, but but organisms, single cell organisms, it's like, why is that? What would be the cover up? What's the problem with that? I don't even understand why that wouldn't be brought out.
Right, and so that's awesome, because we're going to get into that, like why, because there's this ongoing policy that is probably the reason why. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, but like you're saying, yes, we're not talking about, and there are plenty of people out there that believe, and some of the evidence is pretty compelling, but it is not cut and dry like this, like we're going to talk about. But there is some pretty compelling evidence out there that there is some shit that has gone down on Mars that doesn't look natural.
Right.
There's stuff up there that looks engineered by some level of intelligence. It doesn't,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but then you get into this serious debate, and then you get into this whole thing, well, why don't we just land something right there at the spot where the controversy is, and just look around and see what's there.
Right. We have the rovers. We could do it.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So just like you were saying, we're not talking about little green men running around.
Right.
But we're talking about microbes and bacteria and whatever else. Mm-hmm. And so where this starts is, to kick it off, the accepted scientific position right now is, and this is based on the evidence from all these ships going there and landers, is that Mars, and what you can see the visual features through using a telescope, is Mars used to be a lot like Earth. Like they think Venus used to be a lot like, Venus is basically Earth's twin from a size perspective, but not to get on Venus. But Mars, they also feel like used to be like Earth, is just a lot smaller. So it obviously had water, and I think that is beyond the shadow of doubt. Mars has water all over it still.
Absolutely.
It has ice caps that you can see on the North and the South Pole. Mm-hmm. It's got riverbeds.
Absolutely.
It's got dried ocean beds as well. So, and then the thinking is, well, okay, where'd all that water go? And so the main theory there is, Mars is a whole lot smaller. So the reason we still have an atmosphere and water and stuff on Earth is because Earth has a molten iron core, and that core is in motion, and that motion of metal on metal rubbing against each other in the liquid form creates this magnetic field around the planet.
Okay.
And that protects the Earth from the solar wind, from the solar radiation. And you can see it's there. That's what also causes the aurora borealis.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So the charged particles coming from the sun, they hit our magnetic field, and it creates the groovy lights.
Right, the northern lights,
right?
Sure thing.
Right. And so Mars still has a little bit of a magnetic field. It's not completely dead planet, but it's not near strong enough to keep the solar winds from picking away the atmosphere little by little over millions and millions of years.
Right.
And so when that happens, the temperature drops, at night, and the temperature rises really high during the day because there's no shield, and the water evaporates and goes up into the atmosphere, and then just diffuses out into space. So it's gone. But the landers, the Curiosity rover and this rover and that rover, they all have found water, frozen ice. It's called permafrost. It's just frozen into the soil. It's everywhere.
Right.
Okay. Just like it would be on Earth. Okay. So that's kind of thing. So Mars used to be like Earth. So the thing is it shouldn't be weird that there's bacteria and microbial life up there, because the whole place was covered in water.
Right.
And it's in the Goldilocks zone, where Earth and Venus and Mars are. And if you don't know what that is, around stars,
right,
depending on how big the star is and how hot the star is and how much radiation it gives off, there's a ring that varies. You know, in our star, we're in it, which is why we're here. You know, like Mercury is not in it.
That's right.
And Mercury is inside the Goldilocks zone, and Jupiter is not really in the Goldilocks zone.
That's right. It's on the fringe.
Okay.
I did look that up the other day. That's funny.
Yep. So how did they get? And the funny thing. So now we'll get into, you know, why would there be a cover up, right? And when did that all start? But so the thing is in, you know, in the 17 and 1800s. This Italian astronomer, Giovanni Schiaparelli, okay? He was the first person he gets credited with actually seeing these features on Mars he called canale, okay? Which he meant as just channels.
Right.
Okay? So he could see, and on Mars, Mars has like the biggest canyon that we found in the solar system. That one, it's got this giant canyon like right on the equator, and you can see that. You can see it from Earth with a pretty
Decent telescope.
Modest telescope. You can
Okay.
see it, right? And he said, "Wow, there's channels up there," but in Italian, the word is canales or something like that, and then Percival Lowell, who is an American astronomer in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was kind of an aristocrat from Boston. He got fascinated with that, and he kind of misinterpreted that as canals, and that kind of gave him the inspiration or idea to say, "Oh, these are canals. These are engineered
Right,
structures."
they're made. Yeah, they're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So then he started looking, and he kind of had this like confirmation bias going on where he wants to see canals. So then he's going to see canals, and I'll put some pictures up. So he created these maps of Mars that have all these lines all over them that aren't there, as it turns out. They're not there. And so what he did, so just a little bit on Percival Lowell. So he, like I said, he was a very, he came from a very rich family from Boston. He was actually engaged to one of the Roosevelt's daughters. And that marriage didn't work out because Percival Lowell was too much of a like ladies' man,
Right.
and world traveler. So he spent a lot of time in Japan and Dulles, and then he got sick of doing that and came back. Must have been a nice life. So he came back and he was interested in Mars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it must be really awesome to be super rich because and it's kind of funny because he was so interested in Mars. He said, "Hey, I'm just going to build an observatory," because part of the research he did, he discovered that there's really not a telescope, suitable of his needs. So in Flagstaff, Arizona, he actually founded and started to build the Lowell Observatory, which is actually still there today. And actually, it's a famous observatory because that's where this is after Lowell had passed away, but Pluto was discovered at that observatory. So, but anyway, so that's where he did all his observations of Mars. So what he had done, there were several other astronomers that just said, "Hey, we don't see these lines you're talking about." And he was like, "Well, that's because your telescope isn't as good as mine." That's basically what he was saying.
Right.
So there was that. But at the time, again, you're talking about the, early 1900s. And so it wasn't that big of a thing. So, there's not this huge scientific debate that gets any kind of publicity. It's all just in, it's up with the educated few in America.
Sure.
Right. So, but this whole thing about but what did kind of stick in the culture, his debunking didn't, but his kind of, since he was this, kind of well-known figure, people did clamp on to that. Oh my gosh, there's civilization. There's a civilization on Mars.
Right.
right? And I forgot the author's name, but you knew it. It's the guy. So that the author that did John Carter, right?
Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Edgar Rice Burroughs, right? Exactly. You said that before. So he was actually inspired by Lowell's theories.
Oh,
And so that,
I didn't know that.
yeah. So that and so well, he was inspired by the whole. Oh man, there's a civilization on Mars.
On Mars, right? Sure. Okay.
Right. So and it kind of took it to that next level because he's saying, oh, there's canals up there, there's engineering, there's cities, they're irrigating and all this kind of stuff, and so it put that out there, and then that the John Carter book, was kind of the daisy chain, and it inspired H.G. Wells,
Right.
who wrote War of the Worlds, and then boom. Everything was, everybody was like, wow, there's people on Mars. But it wasn't like this craziness. Everybody was like, oh, okay, cool. Like people weren't freaking out. Well, not about War of the Worlds, but just in general.
Right, about something being on Mars.
Yeah, everybody was okay with it. People weren't killing themselves. People weren't getting rid of their religion and all drinking poison and thinking that the universe is going to end. It was just like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, Orson Welles fucked that up a little bit. So.
Well, right. Well, the War of the Worlds thing, but the H.G. Wells story, right, didn't cause anybody to freak out.
No.
It was just a book.
Right, just the radio broadcast did. Right.
Right. Yeah, and that was kind of an interesting thing. So anyway, there was this general acceptance that, hey, it looks like there's probably the closest planet to us probably has a civilization on it. And everybody was like, wow, all right. And it wasn't a big deal. But granted, it wasn't like today where everybody could just look at their phone and you get the latest news. It was also, people were more worried about World War One and Two and the Depression and this and that and all the other things that were happening in the world.
Well, and also, if you're looking at it like that, I mean, yeah, it probably wasn't as big a deal because the reality, even if there were a civilization, that we are going to get to them or they're going to get to us, right?
Yes. So at that time, people, there weren't all these stories about rocket ships and,
right.
People were like, yeah, you're right. The barrier there. I mean, because this is the time like Spirit of St. Louis, right? Where we're just like, wow, we were able to fly over the ocean, So like going to Mars or the moon, that was like
a joke.
Yeah, you were never going to be able to do that because there were people who were like debunking being able to fly in a plane.
Right.
So anyway, all right. So this whole notion, and then the other thing, so. People were just kind of okay with the fact that there were aliens, and then that's evident because if you think back, and I think it was like 1945 or 43, it was before 1950 when the Roswell crash happened, right?
Right.
So if you remember that, when that occurred, the general or the colonel, it was a pretty high-ranking either Army or Navy or Air Force officer, and I think it was Army. He went right to the press. Or he didn't go to the press, but like there was a crash and people knew about it, and the press came out, and the general or colonel just said, oh yeah, it's an alien ship.
Yeah, he spoke to it.
Yeah, and it crashed, and there are aliens in there, and we saw them. So they were like, oh, and then like the next day they were like, oh no, it was a weather balloon. That was crazy. That was a mistake.
Right.
But the reason he said that is because there was no policy about it.
Right.
Okay.
Why would there have been? I mean,
Right. Exactly. So kind of jump forward in time to 1957. Okay. When Sputnik is launched up into space by the Russians.
Right.
Okay. So that kicked off a little bit of a social panic in the United States. Like, holy crap, the Russians are orbiting the Earth. They're going to be able to bomb us from anywhere and attack us now, which was really, really not true because, Sputnik was barely a satellite. It barely made it into orbit.
Orbit, right.
Yeah, and it was only up there for a very short amount of time and then came back down. So technically it orbited, but it was, you could almost argue it was a suborbital flight, but whatever. That kicked it off. So then immediately, President Kennedy at the time, Eisenhower, sorry, at the time, he was like, this is a real thing. And the U.S. was already working on it. We were trying to launch something up into space already, but there wasn't a lot of motivation. So immediately, Eisenhower said, okay, we're going to militarize this. We're going to upgrade the number of people we got working on this. So he issued, he put a program, headed by the Navy. It was the beginning of NASA, right? And he said, okay, and I forget what it was called before NASA, but he's like, all right, we got to get serious about this shit, or we're in trouble. So Eisenhower commissions, or part of his program, he didn't directly do it, I don't think, but part of his initiative to, okay, we're going to build up our space program. As part of that, and you probably heard of this before, they commissioned this think tank in Washington called the Brookings Institute. Mm-hmm. And if you're into conspiracy theory and you're into any kind of alien anything, right? Ancient aliens, Disclosure TV or all that shit that's out there about, whatever.
Right.
Cow mutilations and abductions and all that shit, then you know what the Brookings Report is.
Right.
Okay. So this think tank, they got together and they said, if we're going to have a space program, this is the way it should be run. These are the policies you need. You need this. Like, what if a thing crashes on a city? Or what if you launch something and it goes out of control and kills a bunch of people? Or blah, blah, blah. All these different contingencies.
Right.
Yeah, and scenarios. So in that report, so it took them 3 years. So they worked on that for 3 years, from 1957 to 1960. And then in the report, just 3 pages of the report, basically said, and they said, if we're going to go to the moon and we're going to go to these other planets and we're going to go be up in space, there's a high likelihood that we're going to encounter some type of alien artifact or encounter some evidence of intelligent life outside of the Earth,
right?
Or run into some live aliens.
Right.
Okay? So that policy said, if that happens, then we should suppress that information and not release it to the general public because it will cause, mass hysteria. Mm-hmm. And religions will fall apart and society will fall apart and blah, 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 blah. So that has really kind of been the policy that NASA has adopted for anything that comes up kind of out of the ordinary. They just ignore it and move on. And there's thousands of examples of this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff on the moon that's weird, that has no response. And there's shit tons of stuff on Mars.
Right.
That is like, what the hell is that in that picture from 2 years ago at that's super high resolution, Mm-hmm. And it's just like, zoop, nothing, not talking about it. So, so that is kind of, why the Viking mission, clear-cut evidence, that's part of the belief of why that has been suppressed. But it also doesn't make much sense. So anyway, man, I've been talking a lot, and then this is like a good, because now we've kind of put all the preamble together. Now we can start talking about what happened on these Viking missions.
Right. I mean, because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is, let's be honest, with the space race. I mean, the books I've read on it, and it, within that time frame, like the 50s, right? The mid to late 50s. Right. I mean, it was basically, at least in the beginning, it was not about exploration as much as it was about defense. I mean, that's what it seemingly was. That's right. So, I don't know. And I guess that being said, and that with this gentleman's, with the Viking situation, I don't. I still. I mean, I guess that's what we'll get into because I don't understand the cover up for bacteria. You know,
Right.
I just don't get it.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, and okay, so let's get into that. All right. So in 1976, NASA sent 2 probes to Mars.
right.
Viking 1 and Viking 2. And their primary mission of these 2 things were to look for life.
Right.
That was the primary mission. And maybe that was part of it as well. Maybe their expectations were they're going to find it across all the different experiments they provided. And since they didn't, maybe that's why. I don't know. Maybe that had something to do with it. But so each lander were identical. And the crazy thing is they did the 2 landers so they could have controls. And so they could say, okay, we're going to perform the experiments in 2 different locations that are geographically different and in different environments, sub-environments on Mars. So, they can have the 2 different things. So it's not just one spot.
Right.
So, all right. So to talk about what the experiment that was so successful, okay, that was suppressed. So,
Right.
all right. So it's helpful, and I will post a link to this scientist speech so you can see what we're talking about for yourself. So you can see that we're not making this crap up. So this scientist, and he's a PhD, and he's currently a adjunct professor at Arizona State. Okay, his name's Gil Levin, and in the early or late 60s, he worked for a, I guess, biochemical company. And what his job was to go around, and he lived in California. And this is back before there were real strict environmental protection laws.
Right.
And so this was back in the time where these big coastal cities, they would just dump the raw sewage right in the ocean. And people would get sick. And they're like, why is everybody getting sick? And you're getting sick because there's shit everywhere in the water and you're swimming around in it.
Right.
And so what his company did, or what part of his job was, is to go around and test the water samples to see if the water was safe to swim in. And what they noticed is, and the problem that they had with that is that test, it took a while to get results, because what they would do is they would take a water sample and then they would add a chemical to it, and then wait, and they would add nutrients to it, okay, to look for the kind of bacteria that makes you sick from poo-poo in the water. And what happens is that bacteria would eat the food and create carbon dioxide.
Right.
And that carbon dioxide would make bubbles in the water, okay? But the problem was it would take a week or longer for the bubbles to form. So you'd have to, it was expensive and it took a long time. You'd have to wait. And then, it was hard to keep people out of the water for a week, because it's a big beach. It's hard to, So they're like, we got to figure out a better way, a faster way to test. So Dr. Levin, being smart as hell, said, here's what we'll do. And maybe he didn't make this up, but he did the research and put it all together. But he created this test, which is now basically the de facto test for still to this day to test water samples. Anyway, so what he did was he decided to use radioactive, very low level radioactive nutrients. So what would happen is you radiate the food supply, you drop it in the water supply, the bacteria eats it, and then you put and it changes, the chemistry changes. So a radiation detector is way more super sensitive, right? So so you're going to set your detector up to look for, you're going to feed it, whatever chemical that has radiation in it, and then that bacteria processing it changes it to a new chemical. And so you're going to put that radiation detector to look for that new chemical, that new particle with a certain radiation signature. And as soon as it appears in the water, boom, it sets it off. And it literally does it like within minutes, not weeks. Okay? So he's able to, boom, he solved the problem. Hey, now we can know almost instantaneously, very rapidly, is this water good or does it have the bacteria, we don't want to see.
Right.
Okay? So that test that he did right there is actually more complicated than the test that went to Mars. Because he's looking for a specific bacteria.
Right.
Okay? And on Mars, they're just looking for a huge range of anything.
Right, whatever. Right, sure.
Right. So that's basically the test that they sent to Mars. So you scoop up a soil sample, you add the nutrients to it and some water, and then you add the radiated nutrients to it. The bacteria consumes it, produces the byproduct, and the detector's looking for that byproduct. Now, when they landed on Mars, they did that experiments in Viking 1, and boom, positive, over 90%.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in that one lab, they had a control mechanism set up that was designed by NASA, approved by NASA, scientists, the whole thing. And what they did, they're like, okay, on Earth, if you heat stuff up really high to like over 200 degrees, bacteria, most of it gets killed. Okay?
Right.
So what that means is we kill all the bacteria, and so there should be no results. Meaning that it's not some type of chemical reaction by some chemical in the soil, which is a possibility.
Right.
So they heat the thing up, they heat the sample up, perform the test, no results. So in any other experiment that would have been conducted on Earth, if you would have conducted that experiment on Earth, they would have said, wow, positive. And they did, because they were using that experiment to detect bacteria in water on the planet.
Right.
Okay, so yes, good. And then before they sent it to Mars, they tested it all over the world, thousands of times, to make sure it was good. And it was repeated by, because that's part of the scientific method. You do an experiment and then you have a completely different school or lab or something do the experiment also to see if they get the same results. Because it takes out your confirmation bias, takes out any other biases you might have, or, creates a whole new experiment scenario. And so they did it thousands of times. So then they take it up to Mars, and they get the exact same results, and the control is negative, meaning the experiment is valid.
Exactly.
So then they run it again in the other lander on the other side of the planet. Same thing, positive. Same thing on the control, negative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So then everybody's freaking out. And they go, well, Mars is weird. It has all kinds of radiation up there, and, there's the atmosphere's thin, and, we don't know what's really going on. So it's probably that. It's probably the radiation from the sun. So on the fly, they devise a way. So there's this, the lander's right there, and there's a rock, the little rock there. And they say, how about this? That rock's been there for millions of years. It's never been disturbed. So how about we scoop a little bit out from under that rock that hasn't been getting the radiation, it's been under the rock. How about we do that? So they're like, yes, let's do that. That'll be a good test. So they do that, put it in the sample, run it, boom, positive for life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's that. So beyond the shadow of a doubt, that experiment proved that there was live bacteria. Not evidence of dead bacteria, but live bacteria in the Martian soil in 1976. Mm-hmm. So the other thing is there were two other experiments on the Viking ships that both came back negative for life. Okay? And the thing is to really call them experiments looking for life is a stretch. Because the label release experiment, which is the official name of the one that we were talking about that had the positive, that was the main experiment in the mission.
Right.
But the one before it was looking for organic compounds on Mars. Okay? And this is the funny one is, so what happened is that one came back negative, that there were no organic compounds on Mars. Now, we know that right now to be completely false.
That's right.
Because there's organic stuff all over Mars. There's organic compounds all over Mars. There's methane, there's carbon all over the place. I mean, because that's what an organic compound is. It's one that contains carbon.
That's right.
So that test said it was negative. There's no organic compounds on Mars. And according to Gil Levin, that test was so flawed. There was something fundamentally wrong with that test. He says that test wouldn't have found organic compounds on Earth because it was so broken. So they used that one. And then the other experiment, they were looking for a very, very exotic form of life, okay, which they didn't find. So they didn't find this exotic form of life. They didn't find the organic compounds, which was proven to be completely false. But they found overwhelmingly the label release was successful. So what NASA said is 2 out of 3 were negative. There's no life. So that was their official position on it, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's crazy. It just makes no sense. That was and it makes absolutely no sense to me, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, I don't get it
when
either.
I discovered this.
Yeah, I don't. The whole thing it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I just don't understand the reason not continue.
Right.
To explore this. I mean, it's stupid.
Yeah, and at the time in 1976, Gil Levin was, a relatively young man, in the prime of his career.
Right.
So he immediately, once the dust settled, every single Martian mission to Mars since then, he has applied to have the experiment rerun. And actually, he did a ton of work to actually make it even more definitive. Okay? And his example he wanted to use, but the thing is NASA denied the experiment each time. And they have some of the reasons is that now we've contaminated Mars because we've been there. So there's no reason to go test because we could just say it was from Earth.
Right. Any organism you find is going to be Earth related.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, it's just that's pretty weak, right? So, and then he even offered something that wouldn't be, a contaminant type scenario.
Hey everybody, it's Bo. I wanted to do a quick insert here. We're getting ready to talk about amino acids and carbohydrates, and I am not a biologist or a chemist or a biochemist, so I got this one backwards. I said right-handed amino acids, and it's really left-handed amino acids and right-handed carbohydrates, and I just got it backwards. But the point remains the same. What they were going to test wouldn't be affected by my mistake, so the point's the same. Anyway, thanks.
There's amino acids, okay? And there are several kinds, but the kind that are in the proteins and food that life on Earth metabolizes,
right,
is called right-handed amino acids.
Okay.
Just meaning there's some feature that leans to the right. Literally, not figuratively.
Right, I got you.
So they're not conservative amino acids.
Right.
They're biologically, more of their features point the right way, to the right.
Exactly.
And then, but there's also left-handed amino acids that have some other function. Okay. So what he wanted to do, and you can test for those. They're chemically different.
Right.
So you can test for them. So his original test was just looking for, the byproducts. So he was going to make a test that said, hey, not only is it consuming, and metabolizing, which is one of the things that define life, is it metabolizes food.
Right.
And regenerates itself. So he was going to say, hey, Earth life metabolizes right-handed amino acids. So let's test for that. Because that would actually be really interesting if they didn't metabolize
right-handedly, yeah.
Left-handed. Left-handed, I mean, it was a whole new form of life. But again, that was not allowed. And then it got to the point because, the Mars missions were popular. All these different things we've sent up there, people love it. And it got to the point where NASA actually came to Gil Levin and said, don't even submit any more experiments because we're just going to deny them. So stop wasting everybody's time, And to me, I tell you what, when I look at his presentations, I guess he's had a long time to let this settle down. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't live with that. I don't see how he does. I mean, it would have killed me.
Yeah, I'd have been pissed.
I would have been dead a long time ago because of this. Because I just can't, and like you're saying, like why would we not want to test it again?
Right.
And I guess is it because like after a certain amount of time, it's just you're embarrassed, like when you lose something and you go like 3 weeks and you can't find your keys and you go and rekey your house and blah blah blah, and then you see that they're hanging right there on the wall. You just didn't see them.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but at the end of that could be the case. But if that's so narrow-mindedly stupid. I mean,
right?
Because at the end of the day, it's like what somebody's thought process was 30, 40 years ago. I mean, and isn't that the whole point of science? It's like, your whole thing is you strive to be proven wrong.
Right.
I mean, so that makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, the only thing I can say about that is it maybe in the whole part that we've discussed or that you've thrown in, and is that's a scientist way of thought. But the government's involved as well. So
yeah. The NASA administrators and stuff, they have an agenda, and their agenda is unfortunately just like all the other agendas in bureaucracy. It's to continue your funding.
That's right.
So I mean, that I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. So the Brookings part of hey, we don't really want to find life, but to me that's crazy too because the whole purpose was to go up there to look for life.
Right.
And maybe the conspiracy behind the scenes was, hey, let's not find any so we can just go up there and do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Let's just go land up there and build stuff, or whatever. I don't know.
Hopefully that's coming. So
yeah, I know, but it's just one of these things where that bums me out. And and the thing is, if we're gonna go back, and now we've got private companies doing things. So if a private company goes up there, then hopefully they'll, have the vision to redo this experiment up there. I mean, it's just an eventuality,
Oh, yeah.
So, but anyway, that is the definition of insulting my intelligence. This is the epitome of my intelligence being assaulted. Like this, it's a clear discovery. It's factual evidence. It's scientifically, proven. The methodology is sound, done by NASA. So anyway, so this one I know isn't probably blowing everybody's doors off and fascinating, but I swear if you're interested in Mars at all or the space race at all or NASA at all, this should really resonate with you once you go and watch, Gil Levin's video. It's not long.
Sure.
He's got a detailed one that's like 30 minutes, but he's got one that's like 12 minutes long, and he runs through the whole thing, and it's pretty. That's the one I originally saw, and it's pretty compelling and convincing, and it's just this one's like the stick in my craw, you know. And now I'm glad we're gonna get this one out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. Like and you're right. I'm sure there are a lot of people like for this one. It's not gonna. I mean, there's not a lot of us bitching and going back and forth
Right.
and ranting on people or any institution. But I mean, at the end of the day, like my fascination with it is, I mean, my ultimate fascination with Mars is just the whole now, because like you've said, having private companies that are pushing the envelope and wanting to go, that opens the door and where it's an inevitability, like you said. But with what you're discussing, my bigger thing is like I said, anyone who listens, hopefully, if you do go back and listen and research and look at this man's, you know, videos and his lectures, you can see that there's something wrong. I mean, that doesn't make, again, coming back to what I've said before, the whole question is, what is the reason behind not moving forward with it? What is the reason behind trying to just shut it up real quick, and not shut it up like it's a danger to society? I don't think that's how it's come across. It's almost like they're trying to push it aside like it's unimportant, it's flawed, it's wrong, but yet it's not. I mean, there's a reason for that, and what is that reason? You know, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. And yeah, and it, to me, it's like it's injustice.
Yeah.
Because there's so much energy around Mars. And the thing is, I watched this other, like, so when I was doing this research, you know, you start watching these videos, and then there's a documentary about this and a documentary about that, and I watched one on Curiosity, which is the one from the 90s, I think. Maybe it was Pathfinder. There's Pathfinder and Curiosity and this one and that one. I mean, there's been so many things that have gone to Mars. It's crazy. And there's this interview from the 90s, and maybe it was like a Nova special or something. The PBS showed Nova. And they were the scientists from NASA in the 90s. He's sitting there going, we're so excited because we're going to do this experiment. We're going to try to find life on Mars. And I'm just like, you fucking idiot. You already did. Your own stupid company, your own agency already found it. And it's right there in the files, probably right there where you are, you know, and you're like, hey, we're going to find life on Mars, you know, and really what they were doing is they're really looking for water.
Right. That's
they're
all.
looking for, you know, definitive evidence of water.
That's what they wanted.
Yep. Right. But he was like, oh, we're going to find life. And anyway, so and then the one other thing I forgot that I wanted to talk about was, you know, since then, the other piece is they have the famous found also in the late 90s, but it kind of it took a while for it to make the media. The other one is the Martian meteorite. Okay, so that it's still up for debate, but it is pretty clear that there in that rock there are fossilized single cell organisms in there, or what look to be that, and people, you know, you can argue and debate, but that the main thinking is that's what it is, right? And so, and then I was looking, so I started thinking about, okay, you know, how would somebody debunk that? Like the big thing was, shit, how does and then you start to get down another rabbit hole here, but like, how do we know that meteorite came from Mars? Okay,
right.
That was a question I saw, and they know that because of the Viking mission and other early missions, because there is a radioactive signature in the Martian atmosphere that's unique to Mars.
Okay,
right, and so that same rock, those meteorites they found, they test it. And since we've been to Mars and we've sampled that atmosphere, the same traits, and we sampled the geology also.
Of course,
there,
sure.
And found it. Those same signatures are in these meteors.
Okay.
So, you know, they're like, you know, 99% sure that that's where it came from, which proves that planets can exchange material.
Right.
Okay. So most likely what happened is a volcanic eruption or a decent sized, you know, impact hits the planet, big explosion, sends shit up into the space, which isn't very hard to do on Mars since the atmosphere is so thin and the gravity is relatively weak.
Right.
Right? Same thing on the moon. You know, the moon gets hit all the time with stuff. Stuff can come to Earth from the moon. So that gets you down the rabbit hole of, wow, so if bacteria can get to Earth from Mars, maybe we're Martians. You know?
Right.
You know? So, and that's called panspermia is what that's called. But I love that too. But anyway, that was pretty interesting as well. So another, you know, kind of way to prove that there are, you know, organic compounds on Mars because we find them in the Mars meteorites.
Right.
So.
Well, all right. So I'm sorry. What's the gentleman's name? Gilbert? What's his name?
Gil Levin.
Gil Levins. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is, I don't know if you know this or not, but I would think with what he's done, I mean, has anyone from like SpaceX, like, I mean, because I know what SpaceX wants to do, but
Right.
before we colonize there, I would assume they're going to have their own
Sure.
landings, right? And I would think that they certainly have the means, the money, and the capability to take his experiments and put them forth again, right? I mean, why
Sure.
not? I'd be shocked if they haven't talked to him or reached out to him already. I mean,
Right. Well, that's the other thing. The thing that's kind of funny is you wouldn't even really have to because his tests are so like ubiquitous right now in the world. That's what everybody uses to test water quality.
well, right. But
you know, and to test, you know,
but I mean, I would just say if I were Elon Musk, here's
yeah.
here's somebody that you have who has really dedicated his time and energy to studying and putting forth effort, and not just in the Viking missions, but seemingly since then he's still been very interested and fought toward, you know, moving it forward. Why wouldn't he grab a hold of him? I would.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, he's the reason we're even talking about it right now because, you know, I just came across it one day when I was, you know, looking at, you know, I think I was probably looking at watching TED Talks or something about Mars.
Right.
And that came up as a suggestion. I watched it and I was like, what?
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, it's kind of funny. So to get on that thing, okay, so if you're going to Mars and if the movie kind of The Martian, so I heard a good interview with the guy that wrote that book, and you know he tried to make it as factual as possible and as realistic as possible, much like the show you were telling me about, the Ron Howard, you know, little miniseries show on Mars. You know, they were trying to make it realistic, like this is what we'd actually do. So the thing is if you get up to Mars and you're going to use the Martian soil, you know, as the substrate to grow your food in, right? You're probably going to want to test it,
right,
to see what kind of bacteria is in there, because it's going to, you know, because growing food is fundamentally just a chemical process, right? So you want to know what you're starting with, so you know you don't want to create, you know, mutant potatoes that are going to kill you,
right,
if you eat them. And the other thing that's funny is in The Martian, you know, he was using his own poop to fertilize the ground.
Right.
So you would want to use the Gil Levin test to make sure what you were using was in the right zone. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so you're not contaminating your stuff versus, you know. So there's a whole process for that. So I mean, it's just kind of funny that will eventually happen. If we put people on Mars that are going to be there for a long time, they're going to end up proving that there's bacteria on Mars because they're going to have to test the soil.
Oh yeah.
And it's just going to be an academic part of living there. Like, hey, we're going to grow food, and I guarantee you we're not going to bring dirt with us.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, whoever
that would be crazy.
Whoever's there, they are going to be there a long time. I mean, that's already been,
right.
You know, there's, I think at the earliest, it's like a 6 to 8 month window once they first hit, where before there's any chance of them coming back.
Yeah, and it's because it's that weird. So Mars has a weird orbit, so it's very elliptical.
Yeah, it sure is.
compared to Earth. So it's close at certain times, and then it's really far.
That's right.
So it's one of those things where you got to get. It's almost like you'll need a cycle going, right? Mm-hmm. Where you got a crew going out and a crew going back on that same trip.
That's right.
So what they were thinking. So I also watched a really, really interesting video series. Oh man, the guy's name is Bruce Damer. So I'll put a link to his as well. And we talked about this a little bit, but so NASA actually got him to put together one of the original plans to go to Mars, because, in the 70s when all this, Mars stuff and, post Apollo mission stuff was going on,
right?
There was a funded trip for Mars, and there still is in the NASA budget now, but it's a ways out. But in the 70s, there was a 1980-ish, 81, 82 Mars mission. And so they got this guy, Bruce Damer, to, write up a mission plan. Like, how would we do it? What's the best way to do it? And he has some pretty crazy ideas, some pretty, I wouldn't say crazy, but pretty forward-thinking ideas. Because the big thing in space travel is all the cost is lifting shit off of the Earth, because shit on Earth is heavy.
Sure.
And to blast it up into space takes a huge rocket, tons of fuel, really expensive. So the better, right. So the better approach is to do it in space.
Oh, of course.
Get people up into space as cheaply as you can, and then build your main ship in space.
In there, right.
Right.
Well,
and use the resources in space for the stuff you need.
Well, see, now I'd like to go back and look at that.
It's really cool.
Well, I'd like to. What was their game plan? Because from what I've understood,
right.
well, hold on. Their game plan, meaning, I guess their assumption was once you're there, you're fucking there. You're not.
Right.
You're not leaving.
Right. That was one plan. Right. And that was also like the first moon plan, and that's the way Russia went to the moon. Now, they didn't send people to the moon,
right?
But that's the way they sent their probes up there. They just shot a missile and basically crash landed it on the moon. You know what I mean?
Well, sure.
And like hard landed on the moon. So, but what they're suggesting is do like that. It's called what, like translunar injection or transorbital, where you go up, you orbit, you get some gravity assist going, you shoot yourself off, you orbit, and you send a lander down. And then you have an orbiter, right, that you go back to, right?
Okay.
So and that's how they landed on the moon.
Right.
What this guy's plan is you have a permanent satellite, like receiving station,
right? Sure.
Around Mars,
Sure.
Right. So that's there. So you send a minimal ship there. It docks with kind of the space station around Mars. And then you send a lander down that is the reusable part. It lands, and then it can take off from Mars and redock. And then you get in your bigger ship that takes you back to Earth.
Well, clearly the cost on that is like out of control, because that's not the game plan now.
Yeah, and I don't get that. Yeah, and that's one of the things they're trying to look at. But now you got smart people. Now you got having the independent groups in it is probably the best thing that can happen.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact, because everything you read now, the whole plan is dealing with the fuel issue,
right?
But landing and that same ship being able to take back off. I mean,
yeah. And I think, honestly, man, I think they're going to get to that. They're going to get to this Bruce Damer's approach. They're going to realize that you can't do it, and then the other thing is his model is it's really the first crew that really has to be the hardy bunch that's going to be there for 3 years.
Oh yeah,
minimum,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? Because the meetup, the rendezvous point is only like every 3 years.
Right. Oh yeah.
Earth time.
If you watch that show, that is the hardest part. It's funny because they go through that. It's like the first group that goes, because they're the ones truly colonizing. You know, it's like they're the ones that are like building the basic of infrastructure for their life for them to be able to survive. And then, you know, whatever, a year later, whatever, then here comes crew 2, and they're walking into something that already has heat, already has air conditioning, already has oxygenated atmosphere in their living quarter. It's like, it's simple for them. I mean, they're already growing food. It's crazy, but yeah.
So the other thing that this guy that's really interesting, he's also, he said the more cost effective, like once you get the infrastructure built, the more cost effective way to go to Mars is to go from the moon.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. Yeah,
launch from the moon, because the moon, you know, it's, you know, I forget, like not even 1/6 the Earth's gravity.
Right.
You know, so you can launch huge stuff really easily from the moon. And the moon basically has unlimited resources from the perspective of rocket fuel.
Oh my God! Well, that's a whole nother. The moon is a whole nother show.
Yeah,
I mean, because God, they could do that. I don't know why we don't have bases and things on the moon. It blows my mind.
Yeah. Now, that is a whole other. Don't get me on that.
I know.
We already talked about that.
I know.
I so want to talk about that.
All right. Well, then that will be another one. God.
It might be, because this one's people are probably going to be boring. Who cares about Mars? Life on Mars.
We'll just
boring.
see. We'll see what they say.
Right. But yeah, so anyway, this one guy, this guy's really interesting. He's another rabbit hole you can get down. This guy, Bruce Damer. But his big thing is the moon has tons of water and hydrogen on there, and that's rocket fuel. Hydrogen and water.
That's right.
It makes rocket fuel. And then his other idea is Mars is right there next to the asteroid belt. So like once you're at Mars, you're actually closer to the asteroid belt than you are to Earth.
Right.
Okay. So his thing is he's got this whole thing to go grab an asteroid, like a small asteroid.
Okay.
Because some of the asteroids are more rocky, and some of them are more comet-like, where they're water and mineral and material.
Sure.
And his thing is go out there. He's got this plan to build like this ship that has like these flexible, you know, like a flexible dome thing that you encapsulate the asteroid, and then you use gas and pressure to stabilize it inside your little dome you throw up. And you never really touch it. You just get it, you stop it from rotating.
Right.
And then you kind of tugboat it back to Mars, and then that's your supply of stuff. Just floats in space, and you just harvest the water and harvest the raw materials from that asteroid.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, but then you're on this 3-year cycle. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, so a crew goes to Mars, they're there for 3 years, and then they come back. Like a new crew arrives, and then the old crew can leave.
Right. Exactly.
And they, you know, jump on that. And then he was also saying if you build the big Mars ship that goes from the moon to Mars or from Earth to Mars, back and forth, it can literally be gigantic. You know, it can be huge.
Yeah.
Because you're going to build it in zero gravity.
That's right.
Right? And so as long as you can make it, well, the thing is only part of it has to be where the humans are, you know, but you can have all these robots do all these experiments, you know, and you don't have to worry about shielding them from radiation, because that's the other thing that costs a lot, is shielding from cosmic rays and shielding from micrometeorites that are flying around there. That's the big dangers in space. But if you don't have to worry about that, you can make certain parts of the ship that are kind of like self-healing, and you can have robots out there doing those things, you know, that don't necessarily need a human to do. But then you could also have people that just live on this ship, you know?
Sure.
They don't really get off on Mars. They just go back and forth.
Right, yeah,
you know?
Of course.
And they conduct experiments, and, you know, there's all kinds of stuff you can do in space and blah, 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 blah. So that's a really cool take on it as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
So what were you telling me about when you think all this is going to happen? Like, I thought it was going to be further out, but
no,
you were saying you thought it was going to be like in 10 years or something?
Not 10 years. If you watch that show, and it's Mars, whatever, something. I can't remember the
Yeah, I
name
think it's
of
just
it.
called Mars.
It might be, and it's great.
Yeah.
It is really good. And basically what it is you're right. Ron Howard did it. And it is a dramatization of what's going on, obviously, on Mars. But it's like
Right.
they take you from that to real-life people, whether it be NASA, other scientists, other innovators who have done their research and are talking about what the show is showing you and the reality of it and what will most likely happen. And almost all of them were like, and it is all based off of, I guess, the initial thought process of Elon Musk with SpaceX. But that's what they're talking about. And the game plan is somewhere in like the mid 2030s. That's the timeline goal they're looking for.
Cool.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's Elon Musk's timeline goal, right? NASA's not saying that, but Elon's saying that. So
Right. And I guess the new rocket that they just set up is going to help that out, right?
that's all it's about. That's why.
Whatever that was.
Yes, that's the entire basis for his game plan for Mars, is because outside of what you're talking about with like an actual like orbiting space station to be the go-between, his whole thought process is, no, you got to get there, and then the same ship has to be able to get off and come home.
Yeah. And I think so. I'm with you there because if you remember, the moon race, right?
Uh-huh.
The first one, Apollo 11, it was basically just let's just land on that thing.
That's right.
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 Let's just get there. Let's just get that out of the way. And I think maybe that's part of what Elon Musk thinks. He's like, hey man, let's just shoot a rocket up there and land a person up there, even if they don't do anything but just kind of get out like the moon, like Neil Armstrong. Just kind of walk around, kick some rocks over, take a picture, wave, do a Snapchat, and then come home. Right?
Actually, no. If you look, you got to watch that show. No, that's
okay.
And the only reason I say that is because the time that it takes to get from here to Mars.
Yeah, it's like 6 months.
Yeah, they're like, if you're going, you better. No, I think that's not true. I think the whole game plan is for them to go and then to start. Like they're going to start as first thing.
Okay.
You'll see.
Right.
It's
it's
worth watching. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm kind of biased because I've seen this Bruce Damer vision thing, and that seems to me to be like the most sensible way to do it. But who knows? Maybe this Elon Musk plan includes, because the thing is, man, it includes an orbital descent thing, because the thing is, when you look at the history of Mars attempts to land, right? It's like 50-50.
Yeah, it's bad, right?
Because when you look at Russia, I don't think has ever landed anything. Every one of their things crashed,
right?
And then the European Space Agency's things crash, and the one from India crashed. Like landing on Mars is hard because the atmosphere is just enough to make it hard.
Yeah, it is. And they talk about that.
Yeah, you got to come in at the right end because you can burn up, not as easy like in Earth.
Right.
But then there's so you can't just do this slow descent. The gravity's strong enough where it's going to pull you in and smash you.
Right.
So you have to have some type of aero braking, some type of thrusters, which changes the dynamics of everything, and just makes it hard.
Yeah, I don't think, and I don't remember 100%.
Right.
And maybe something was the gentleman you're talking about. What's his name? Damer, whatever.
Bruce Damer. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't recall that they mentioned him per se.
Mm-hmm.
And and hearing what you're talking about makes perfect sense. I think if I'm not mistaken, and you go back and watch it. Mm-hmm. I think the SpaceX thing is what the point of that is the cost, right, of doing the Damer thing is, because you're going to build something that you're intending to stay there and it's going to work, where this is kind of, I think Elon's thing is, let's see if we can make this work.
Yeah.
then-
That's kind of what I was saying.
Yeah, and then
that's kind of what I was saying.
And if this works, then that opens the door. If we can prove we can get on and get off,
Right.
then absolutely we can have an orbital satellite where we can work from and launch from and dock to and all the good stuff that you would think about. So
Cool. All right. Well, we're at like an hour.
yeah, I think we're good. I mean, we'll
And-
see. I mean, I apologize to anybody because I didn't say anything tonight. I think that was offensive to anybody or pissed anybody off. So I apologize for that.
Well, Martians are stupid, and they're all dead. I mean, they're Martians.
Well, seemingly NASA's stupid. So
there you go.
if I'm going to
Yes.
give somebody shit, I'm going to give them shit.
Yes. All right. Well, that's life on Mars, and I guess this is one of the ones that kind of inspired me to want to do a podcast like this. So it's really, hey NASA, don't insult my intelligence.
That's right.
Gil Levin found life on Mars in your program in 1976. You bastards.
That's right. You
Give
sons
the guy
of
the
bitches.
give the guy the credit he deserves.
Yeah.
He needs to win the Nobel Prize.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
You're right. It's stupid.
All right. Well, until next time, this has been Bo.
I'm Jerry.
And don't insult my intelligence, please.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.
I'm Gil Levin. I'm currently an adjunct prof in the Center for Advanced Scientific Concepts of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences of Arizona State University, Tempe. I was able to put together an experiment that went to Mars to look for life by picking up a sample of the Martian soil. The Viking spacecraft lander did that, and no one, including me, was very hopeful this would work on Mars. However, the possibility of life on Mars was so astounding that NASA described the whole experiment of looking for life on Mars as perhaps the greatest experiment in the history of science, which is puzzling because while they still say that, there's something wrong in their lack of pursuit of it. At any rate, surprisingly, as soon as the first squirt of nutrient hit that Martian soil, we got a big bulge of gas coming out. And it came out for the entire 7 days, or Martian sols, of the experiment. That was astounding, that it was indeed a positive response for living microorganisms in the soil of Mars. That is what happened. Not only did it happen, but at Viking 1, it was duplicated. And it happened again. And the controls happened again. At Viking 2, 4,000 miles away, we got a similar response, positive. For the 37 intervening years, NASA and other astrobiology scientists have been explaining away, or attempting to explain away, my experimental results. They've been unsuccessful. Every time I have sent in an upgrade of my original experiment as a proposal for a new spacecraft, it's been rejected. I was told directly by the head of the Mars program, if you send in another proposal to send an experiment to look for life on Mars, it will be immediately rejected. That's bad science. Science demands, if you get a positive result, you go back, replicate it, and then expand it and learn more by the same technique. There is life on Mars, and that means there should be life throughout the cosmos. The next experiment should be to send up that chiral experiment to see whether life on Mars is the same as life on Earth or different. If the chirality were different, that would be a stupendous discovery. It would open up the cosmos to life.